A group of friends have long dreamed of thrills, and this time they decided to spend the night in a house about which there were terrible rumors. This house was considered an ordinary urban legend. People talked about strange sounds, disappearances, and incomprehensible phenomena that allegedly took place here. But the friends did not believe in the supernatural. They decided to prove to themselves and others that there is no horror in abandoned places. That night they gathered in an old, long-abandoned mansion, which stood on the outskirts of the city, overgrown with dense trees and hidden from human eyes. The house had not been visited for a long time, and its very appearance was frightening. Broken windows, a roof overgrown with moss, and doors that seemed ready to fall at the slightest touch. However, their plan was simple: to spend the night in this place and prove to everyone in the morning that there is no mysticism. But tonight, they were going to learn that fear doesn't always come in the form you expect it to. When they entered the house, their first thought was how long it had been abandoned. The dim light of the lanterns only accentuated the peeling walls and scattered glass fragments on the floor. No one paid attention to the slight chill that crept along their backs, blaming it on drafts. They settled into the former living room, laying out sleeping bags and joking with each other about spirits that can appear at night. But soon, oddities began to happen. One of them heard the creaking of the floorboards on the second floor, but attributed it to the old age of the house. The smell of rot was gradually increasing in the air, as if something vile was decomposing somewhere very close by. But what started as jokes soon became something much more sinister. When James, one of his friends, suggested exploring the house, others supported his idea. They began to look around the rooms, but the further they went, the stronger the feeling that someone was watching them. In one of the bedrooms they found an old diary, the entries of which evoked eerie associations. We hear them at night. They move along the walls. There's no way out. But that didn't stop them. When they got to the basement, the situation became really dangerous. The basement was not empty, as they had expected. There were old, dust-covered shelves with ancient tools and, what surprised them the most, strange metal cages that seemed to be used for something creepy. But the scariest thing was that on one of the walls, there was a fresh mark from something sharpened, as if someone had recently tried to get out. When they returned to the living room, their companion, Laura, had disappeared. In a panic, they started looking for her, but soon realized that the house seemed to have changed. The corridors were getting longer, the doors that had been locked before were now open, and the rooms seemed to be moving. The walls were covered with strange footprints, as if someone or something was moving behind them. The fear became unbearable. They realized that a night in this house was far from a joke, and something that lived here had long ago chosen new victims for itself. When Laura disappeared, everything in the house began to feel different. At first, the guys thought that she just decided to make fun of them by hiding somewhere, but the minutes dragged on and she was not visible. First a little excitement, then panic, and now James was shouting her name, running around every corner. No answers. The house, despite all its abandonment, seemed to be coming to life. Every little thing suddenly seemed ominous. The creaking floor, the soft sounds of dripping water, the trembling curtains that moved in the draft. Sam was the first to notice something strange. He went to an old closet in the hallway, near the stairs, and noticed fresh fingerprints on the dusty surface. They were thin, as if they belonged to a child, and they reached for one of the drawers. At first it seemed funny to him. How could there be fresh footprints here? But then he had a vague suspicion that they were not alone here. "It's just someone's stupid joke," James said, although there was uncertainty in his voice. Maybe Laura just decided to scare us. However, no one saw how she could have evaporated so quickly. There was only one exit in the living room, and through it they would have noticed if she had left. "We should split up and look for her," Sarah suggested, but her suggestion was met with silent resistance. "Split up? Are you serious?" Sam chuckled nervously. "After all this, we have to stick together." They began to explore the house with renewed caution. The tension was palpable. Every step seemed louder. Every creak made them turn around in anticipation of something terrible. The house was obviously old. Perhaps someone before them had used it for some dark business, but they tried not to dwell on it. Every time someone suggested going back to the living room, another part of the group insisted on looking for Laura. They began to inspect the second floor, and it was there that the situation changed dramatically. In one of the rooms, which had previously been locked, they found torn sheets hanging from the bed and strange streaks on the floor, as if someone was dragging something heavy across it. James bent down to get a better look and realized that these were footprints, bare, dirty feet going into the hallway. "It's just Laura trying to scare us," James said again, but there was no longer that confidence in his voice. He didn't believe his own words. Nevertheless, they followed the tracks that led to the old storeroom. When they opened the door, a strong smell of mold and something rotten hit them in the nose. They saw Laura's torn sweatshirt on the floor, as if it had been thrown in a hurry. That was the last time they saw her stuff. They began to realize that the situation was beyond their control. Every minute in this house turned into a nerve-wracking ordeal. It was getting harder to breathe. Fear was literally pressing on my chest. And then Sam, who had not left the door, saw a shadow appear in the doorway. He rushed to the exit, trying to get them out. But the door, which used to open easily, is now jammed. It seemed that the house was holding them, and no one was going to leave. "We have to find something to knock her out," James shouted. In a panic, they started looking for something heavy that could help. But the more they searched, the more small details began to surface. The house was full of things that indicated that someone had lived here recently. Yellowed newspapers on the kitchen table, an unfinished cup of coffee, old but clean blankets on the couch. "Someone was here recently," Sarah managed, her voice trembling. "But where did they go?" And then Sam noticed an old wooden door under the stairs, which had previously been hidden behind a closet. She looked so insignificant that they didn't even notice her. Without a word, they walked up to it and opened it with difficulty. They saw a narrow staircase leading down to an even darker part of the basement. "Are you kidding?" James said, stepping back. "We're not going there." But there was no choice. They all realized that, most likely, that's where Laura is. Or what's left of her. They went downstairs, and with each step the air grew colder, as if the whole house was breathing icy fear. When they reached the basement, the dim light of the lanterns picked out metal cages from the darkness. Their guesses were confirmed. It was something like imprisonment. But the scariest thing was that some of the cages were open, and there were signs of a struggle inside. There were pieces of clothing, hair, and blood on the floor. "Oh my God, what happened here?" Sarah whispered, trying not to faint. But the worst was yet to come. When they reached one of the cages, the door closed behind them with a loud hum. James rushed to the exit, but the door was locked on the other side. Heavy footsteps sounded in the darkness. Someone or something was slowly approaching them from the far corner of the basement. There was no time to shout, argue, or panic. All they knew was that if they didn't get out right now, no one else would know what had happened to them. They grabbed an old crowbar that was lying against the wall and began pounding on the door with force. Each new attempt brought them more and more despair, because the steps were getting closer. There were soft footsteps outside the door. Someone or something was standing there. And at that moment, James hit the crowbar again, and the door finally gave way. They flew out, ran without looking back. The night wrapped them in a cold wind, but it was the wind of freedom. The house was left behind. Its walls hid the mystery of what happened that night. But the scariest thing was that they never found Laura. They climbed out and breathed in the cold night air with relief. Thick darkness surrounded them from all sides, but compared to what they had experienced inside the house, it seemed like a real salvation. No one said a word. Everyone was trying to make sense of what had happened. The same question was in their minds. Where had Laura gone? James broke the silence first. "We have to go back for her. We can't just walk away." Sam looked at him with wild eyes. "Come back? Are you crazy? This house is a trap. We barely made it out on our own. Do you want to go back in there?" Sarah, trembling, moved aside and sat down on a fallen tree. Her fingers were trembling, and she was staring straight ahead, not focusing on anything. She could be dead, she whispered, as if she couldn't believe her words. These words hung in the air as if they were thinking about it, but didn't dare to say it. James looked at the dark building behind them. It stood motionless, like a cold and dead monolith, giving no answers. But James knew one thing: they couldn't leave without trying to find her, even if it's the last thing they do. "We can't just leave," he said firmly. "If we don't come back, she'll be left there, alone." Sam was torn between the instinct of salvation and guilt. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, but everything inside screamed that leaving Laura was wrong, and it was this conflict that was tearing him apart. "All right," Sam finally agreed, "but only if we go together and stay close, not a step aside." They understood that there was no time to argue. It was dangerous to delay, and every lost moment could cost Laura her life if she was still alive. They headed back to the house. This time, their footsteps were more cautious, each sound causing tension. The house no longer seemed lifeless to them. He seemed to be watching them. When they were inside again, the air seemed to thicken with fear. They tried to stay close, but every corner, every sound was now perceived as a threat. The corridors, which had seemed simple and short before, seemed to stretch out, as if they were deliberately confusing them. All the little things they had noticed before seemed insignificant, but now every item was suspicious. They went upstairs, where they first lost Laura. The whole room where her sweater was found seemed even more creepy now. The smell of rot increased, although there was nothing visible. Sarah first went to the place where they had seen the footprints, and noticed a strange grinding noise coming from the wall. "There's something here," she whispered. The others came up to her, and James ran his hand along the wall. He stopped when he came across something hard and unusually cold. It was a metal plate embedded in the wall. Their hearts froze when they realized that this was not just an interior detail. It was a disguised entrance. "It looks like a secret passage," Sam muttered. James, without hesitation, began groping for how to open the plate. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and a narrow shaft leading down opened in front of them. The thin light of the flashlights picked out dust and cobwebs, giving the impression that this passage had not been used for many years. But the traces of fresh dirt on the floor suggested otherwise. "That's where we're going," James said shortly, clutching the flashlight in his hand so that his fingers turned white. They went down into an underground tunnel leading somewhere under the house. The walls here were made of rough concrete, and it looked like the passage had been dug out by hand. The further they went, the colder and wetter it became. Water dripped from the ceiling, creating a monotonous, unnerving sound that mixed with their breathing. "Whoever it is, he doesn't want to be found," Sam whispered, looking around. The tunnel suddenly widened, and they found themselves in a huge basement, resembling a vault or an abandoned shelter. There were several doors here, and they froze, not knowing where to go. James went to the first door, but it was locked. Sarah noticed something that made her freeze. Crumpled pieces of paper lay on the floor, against one of the walls. She picked one up and saw that they were notes written in a hasty and trembling hand. The notes clearly belonged to different people, who may have once tried to get out of this place. "We've been here for 3 days now. There are not enough supplies. There are only walls and these steps around. No one comes out alive. This place keeps us trapped. We don't know who or what it is. They come at night, but no one comes back. There is a way out here, but we don't know where it leads. No one has returned." Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. These people that no one knew about, they found themselves in the same situation here, just like they are now. "We can't stay here," Sam said, reading the notes over his shoulder. "We need to find her and leave as soon as possible." They moved down the corridor, opening the doors one by one. The rooms were empty, except for some old objects lying around, long forgotten and covered with a layer of dust. They finally found her in one of the rooms. Laura was lying on the floor, unconscious but alive.